So what we want to do is, for the last 10 years, we've been really conscious about teaching you and educating you, but we want to start with some basic understanding so the community can understand basically what's going on, right? So what we're talking about here is generally property is perceived as a safe investment.
Safe as houses.
Safe as houses, Bryce. And the reason for that is because the way in which the rules are in the game, it does accommodate for attracting people towards property, especially owner-occupiers, Bryce, because everything that they earn is obviously capital gains tax-free, but it also attracts investors. And what we want to talk about there is this concept of investing. So if we just bring up our first chart, and for those of you on audio, what we're basically showing here is this is just a snapshot of the Australian property market since 1980, and this is looking at all dwellings, and we can see there that and Charlie's right, look at that, some of this is inflationary, but you can see, property is a good inflation hedge. But you can see there that property prices have moved through the sort of just under 50,000 right through over towards heading up towards 750,000 as a median value across the country. So that just tells us a story that a lot of people can comprehend, pretty simple, that over the long term property prices keep going up.
And reflects the sense of the great Australian dream in this country, where
correct
people there's no class system in this country. We all had the opportunity back in the 50s. It proliferated, and then because we're a developed country, we also have the luxury of it not just being shelter. We get to have it as a piece of status as well. So really, what that graph was showing was just the ongoing demand for the great Australian dream.
Correct.
Over time.
Yeah, and again, based on the rules of the game, that creates the marketplace, and then the market responds to demand and supply in the short term, but then over the long term, it obviously creates further technical value over time. And that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of good segue into this idea of and I don't want to be critical of every investor, but in terms of a lot of property investors don't have strong technical knowledge of the market. They take what we might call a system one view, where they think in a short period of time, and they understand it in that way. And that's, again, why we started the Property Couch. So generally speaking, we've got quite a few accidental property investors who have upgraded and kept their original home, or they've got holiday homes that they rent out or whatever it is. So they're not necessarily the pure investor type, but if they've turned their existing owner-occupied home into an investment, we've got that. We've also got a lot of people who are making those decisions based on quick analysis, where property prices are going to go up. I've been told to buy here, and they follow the herd. And we've definitely seen that being really, really successful for some and very unsuccessful for others, because at the moment where let's be honest, since the turn of the new century, there's been a hell of a lot of people who have been buying property through sales tactics of spruikers, and we still see those types of sales tactics in play today, and that is obviously resulted in this whole idea of these get-rich-quick solutions, and we want to just basically talk to that. But
and I guess it's also because I think about this a lot, because if you're an employee, your language is security, and I think about that through my own experience with my father and how he was fully driven by security. And for me to understand the language of freedom, I actually had to, we've dedicated our professional life, our personal lives to understanding the language of freedom. But you're not getting the language of freedom at school. You're not getting the language of freedom at university. You're not getting the language of freedom in your first job. You're not getting the language of freedom if you're working for someone else. So it's actually something that you need to deliberately go and learn the language of freedom. And if you're driven by the language of security and it's inbuilt and it's a fear-based, it's easy for people to then want to trust people who speak the language of freedom.
That's right.
Without and so to your point, that's where the quick thinking comes in.
Yeah, and that's the hard bit, right? Because they may sound genuine, or they certainly sound convincing, don't they?
I think most of what they're talking about is right. Most of it.
Yeah.
Except
the execution
where it matters.
Yeah, or so and self-interest.
Yeah.
So how are they doing it? Are they genuinely interested in the desire of the people they want to serve when they are talking in that space?
Yeah.
And there's definitely the Anthony Robbins of this world, and who are really thinking in abundance and that type of thing, and that's the mindset you and I bring. But there are unfortunately those who see it as a means by which they can coerce and influence people, and obviously for their own financial gain. So that's the challenge.
The best mental model that I've thought about a number of times over the journey is, if you think about a standard triangle, there's a few that have got the money at the top, and then the middle is largely the middle class and the bottom. And that structure is actually stable.
Yep.
And if you flip that on its head and have the apex at the bottom, the structure is not very stable, and eventually it just falls back to having that structure stable.
Well, we also know society won't tolerate that as well.
So the system is more important than the individual within the system. The system
Say that again. I think that
is more important than the individual within the system.
Yep.
So therefore, to your point about, you've talked about electric bikes, we've talked about interest. The people who have the language of freedom, right? If they're going and doing what Kerry Packer said, and if you're not doing everything you can to minimise your tax, you need your head read.
Yep.
If the majority does that, that structure becomes unstable.
Lovely.
Whereas if the minority go and do that, it's fine.
Yep.
So that's what we're talking about, and what's happening is where people are talking about, loopholes with trusts and finding out how they can get unlimited borrowing capacity. If that's for the people who understand freedom and they do it with integrity and they don't commit fraud and it stays, well then the structure still has its integrity. But as soon as it starts to be flipped.
Well, let's use a recent example, right? So a couple of weeks ago, we heard Jim Chalmers come out and he's changed the superannuation tax legislation. So they took to the polls that they wanted to tax anyone who had $3 million or more. They were going to tax them 30% tax rate, and that was also unrealised gains. Now, and it wasn't indexed, right? So there was going to be more and more people who were going to get caught in that, and they were going to have to pay higher taxes inside super. So you talk about the number of people that it's going to affect. Well, as it gets more and more of the middle class into that, it makes it unstable. So it wasn't a smart system design. So what did he do? He and the Prime Minister, and I think it's the Prime Minister who probably pushed the conversation in the right direction, because he's more of a centrist and Jim's more of a lefty. So ultimately what we've got now is a new proposal whereby you're still going to be the 30% taxed at the 3 million, but you're not going to be taxed on unrealised gains, which is good. And ultimately they've introduced now a 10 million level, and that to that point, the really well-to-do people at the very top have to pay a bit more tax. And that's the egalitarian society that we have here in this country.
Yeah.
You do super well, you'll have to pay higher taxes. And so the tax strategies that were implemented by the super rich inside superannuation is now going to be adjusted for. But that sort of keeps the cash flow that they need coming in for their spending program that they want to deliver for the country. So I think that's a good example of, if too many people, or if the government's missing out, they'll change the rules. And so that's why we want to talk to that. So I think,
but it's always going to affect the middle class. The super rich aren't going to pay that tax. They'll
work out
Well, you think about all the people in the UK. A lot of the millionaires are leaving.
Yep. Yeah,
and
billionaires.
The uber rich, they're not staying there.
No.
They're going to better tax environment.
They are getting the world's best tax advice and looking at different ways to beat the system.
Well, it just highlights that the middle class are the people that are ultimately going to be paying it,
Yep.
and that's why the system is largely, with that triangle, is largely about that that middle bit staying stable, so that the system doesn't become unstable.
Well said.
The system is more important than the individual within the system.
Well,
as soon as you bank that,
correct,
you get on with getting on with it.
That's right. The system doesn't work if everyone abuses the system, and that's the point also.